Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Up next, we have Tim Grant. Tim is the CEO of the R3 Lab Research Center. He's previously held positions at UBS O'Connor, a $6 billion multi-strategy hedge fund, and Benchmark Solutions, as well as many others. Tim has an MA in Materials Science and Metallurgy from the University of Cambridge, and an MSc in Financial Engineering from the University of London. Please join me in welcoming Tim Grant.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. So thank you for coming back from lunch for a start. I have the unenviable task of keeping you awake. Now you've just had a few minutes in the sun and you've had some lunch. Thank you to Tyler for pulling his friends together. You know, if you don't know, it's very rare to get this quality and consistency of speaker in this topic like this. You've kind of got a who's who in terms of the companies that really matter in this space. It's a pretty extraordinary morning, so I really, it's an extraordinary day. You guys have about as good an intro as anyone's going to get into this space. I've certainly enjoyed all the talks. There's such a high quality. I mean, this is the cutting edge. So hopefully in the next few minutes, I'll give you a sense of what's going on in R3 when you talk about the space of distributed ledgers and blockchain. The good news is we tend to be in there along with Hyperledger and IBM and Ethereum and Consensus and a lot of the other big names in the space, Digital Asset and Symbiont, etc. So we're there too. It's exciting that we've gotten that far to be sort of synonymous with the space. But what does it really mean? So, you know, the title is not mucking about really, is it? Redefining the foundations of finance. That's our focus. We're in the financial services vertical. We're not doing anything out of that, and we won't be doing anything out of that. So everything I'm going to talk to you about is very much from a financial services kind of perspective. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll kind of have a sense of what we're up to. So oh, that's not changing. Changed there, but technical issues. Seems to be stuck. Yeah, let's exit out. Bear with us a second. There you go. Wonderful. Thank you. So, fourth industrial revolution. It's been talked about a few times. People talked about data. The gentleman asked about data. So really, as much as we like to think that everybody in the world is talking about blockchain and DLT, the truth is not that many people know what it is yet. We're in it every single day, so we honestly think that everybody eats and sleeps this stuff, but they don't. And in fact, AI and cloud and biometrics and all these other emerging technologies are equally important. And in fact, it's the confluence of these technologies that's going to really change the game, right? It's not DLT on its own that's going to change the game. It's when DLT and big data and AI and biometrics and cloud and 3D printing all crash together to make an augmented economy, what I call the post-internet economy. That's really what this is all about. So I always start with this just to remind everybody that we're just a piece of the puzzle in this new future fourth industrial revolution state. But we're a pretty important piece. So what are we doing at R3? We're trying to redefine the foundations of finance. But there's nothing short of that is what we're looking to achieve. And you'll see kind of hopefully by the end that we've got a credible shot at being able to really push that and help that to happen. But the key is not just the technology, it's the collaborative networks part. So one of the new kind of ways of looking at it that I've been talking about recently. So I was at a conference in Hong Kong called the Internet Economy Summit, and I put a few noses out of joint when I got up on the stage and told them that, didn't that sound a little bit 1994? Shouldn't it be the post-internet economy, or the augmented economy as I've started to call it? And it's interesting when you look at the sort of the B2C space and the P2P space, that the sharing economy is something that we all understand and we all know. Uber and Airbnb are just sort of part of who we are. And if you're growing up to be, if you're a millennial or Generation Z, the next guys that are coming up behind, you don't know anything other than the sharing economy. I will share my house and I'll get paid for it. The thing is, the sharing economy hasn't really made it to B2B. Banks, especially, are not very good at sharing. They're famously fierce and want to kind of keep their own space. So what's going to change here, and what this is, why the collaborative networks part is so important, is that the sharing economy is going to make its way up through this technology into the B2B space, and particularly into financial services, which is a huge lift given how regulated it is. But that's really what we're doing. We're trying to get a shared layer so that we can do things better. Now, our vision is to outdated infrastrucures. It's been just talked about. You know, Govinda gave us a great sort of historical perspective on this. We're talking about really creaky old stacks that are just falling apart. Let's call a spade a spade. I used to work at UBS, and like with any other big investment bank, it was a really kind of dodgy system that the whole thing is teetering on. It works, but you kind of run out of space to make it any better. So we're going to revolutionize these outdated infrastructures and create the shared truths. Now, what's really interesting, actually, is when you see the way that all of my compatriots have been expressing the importance of the space and what this technology does. Everyone's got a different view. There isn't one textbook way of describing blockchain or what it can do yet. The industry's actually done a pretty terrible job of being able to explain why it's important, right? It's kind of a dirty little secret that we're not quite sure how to explain it to you yet. But we all know that it's massively important. So I've got a way of doing it that I'm going to try and kind of go through now and see if it works for you guys. But it's really around the shared truths. I actually think trust in financial services is a bit of a red herring. It's not so much about trust, but it is about knowing what the truth is. But contracting seamlessly without error for any purpose, that's a little bit hardcore to even suggest that you might be able to achieve that. But we're not crazy. We think that's what we're going to be able to achieve. Now, a couple of other perspectives. When I was in Hong Kong that time, actually, or the last time I was there in January, it was the Chinese New Year. So I decided to put the history of DLT in kind of similar terms. 2014, and you saw some of this history. It's kind of really amazing what you guys have seen today. You've kind of gotten where this all started and how Vitalik came up with the first paper for Ethereum. So 2014, I like to call the year of enlightenment. Remember my frame of reference is financial services, right? So banks started to wake up. The smarter banks, and some of them had woken up before, but there was this general stirring in 2014 that people were like, something's going on here and I need to pay attention. 2015, lo and behold, R3 comes together with 42 banks. Out of nowhere, over a period of 2-3 months, we went from 0 to 42 banks. And you had Hyperledger that came together, and digital asset really came to the fore. So 2015 was the year of the hype. And then 2016, last year, we really tried to get some proof of concepts out there, but proof of concepts are a dreadful bore. We don't want any more proof of concepts. We've proved the concept, all right? We need pilots and production. And I think you've seen that with Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, the great stuff that's going on at IBM. We kind of need to get beyond the nonsense and beyond the just mucking about and seeing if it will work. Now we got to get this stuff into production. And so I think next year is the year of production. As much as some people would love to say it's this year, that's just not feasible really in a large scale sense. And let's hope it is next year that we have the year of production. So here's the slide that usually I get the most feedback on. This is the best version I've come up with of what is this all about. Let's not talk about consensus mechanisms. Let's not talk about different architectures. Let's not talk about religious fervor about cryptocurrencies, no cryptocurrencies, internets, intranets. Who cares? None of it matters. It will all be forgotten when this stuff becomes ubiquitous. It'll just be a bunch of religious huff and puff and fervor. What really matters is what is it going to do for us? And in 20 years' time, when we look back and we kind of do what we're doing now with the internet, what are we going to see? What are we going to see that happened and changed? Well, what happened and changed with the internet is that in the old way of doing business, and we've got a stylized example here, which is just two participants in a transaction. It could be two people, could be two companies, it doesn't really matter. Two entities coming together to do some sort of transaction. And it's a contractual transaction. Smart contracts where the contracts are really legal in nature. Well, in the old world, we had our perception of what happened, we processed our data, and we communicated very badly using fax machines and phone calls and smoke signals and carrier pigeons, right? That was the old world. Now, what happened, The internet revolution, really the tail end of the third industrial revolution, gave us the flattening of the communication layer. And look what that did. It's revolutionized our lives. But what it didn't do is it didn't really revolutionize banking and finance. Everybody said it would, but it kind of didn't. It upended media and other areas of the world, but it didn't really change meaningfully the way that we look at financial services. And the reason that it didn't is because it didn't change the way we process data, and it didn't change the way that we perceive the truth. We just are able to send data around to each other in a much easier way. We flattened the communication layer. And what distributed ledger technology is going to allow us to do is to process information in a shared way and actually allow us to absolutely be crystal clear on what the truth actually is. Now that is a profound and meaningful statement that I'm making. It's as profound as it would have been in the late 80s to say that one day everybody will be able to go onto this internet thing and send information to each other instantly. That would have been mind-blowing at the time. And what I'm telling you is kind of mind-blowing. But we've all lived through that first one, so we're all sensitized to this and we're ready to accept, which is why I think most of us in the industry believe this is going to go much quicker than you think. But that's what's at stake, the processing layer and the truth. So, distributed ledgers at a glance, a bunch of slides today. Mine is just one perspective. It's got some mistakes on it. It's just one way of looking at it, that distributed ledgers is the superset. Blockchains is one way of architecting a distributed ledger, and there are others, and there will be many others that will come along. And cryptocurrencies generally tend to operate on blockchains, but people have been trying to digitize currency for decades. And then you've got your non-blockchains, and you've got your industry ledgers, and the superset is ledgers, which have been around for hundreds of years. And then you've got all these different elements. And again, you guys have seen this, a bunch of slides today, so you don't need me to go over it again. What I will say is the smart contracts part, and this was interesting because I was on a panel the other day with Andrew Keys from Consensus, and we both got asked a question about smart contracts. And he said, smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts, which is, that's the angle of it's really just a piece of computer code. But actually the way we talk about it is smart contracts have to be smart and they have to be contracts. Because why? Because we in financial services, every transaction is rooted in some legal pros, right? An insurance contract, a derivatives contract, a bank deposit, some transfer of cash or value has to be contractually rooted in some legal pros. So when we think of smart contracts, that's the way we think about it in R3. We think about real contracts rather than just pieces of code. And it's important to have both, but we're in the real contract world. So, The Economist, part of the hype, October 2015, the trust machine. Yes, the trust machine, if you're going to think about it from a Bitcoin perspective. But like I said, it's not so much trust that we care about in financial services, because you know what? We are mandated and regulated to have to trust each other. I've got to do KYC. I've got to do anti-money laundering laws. I have no choice but to do business people that I am legally enforced to trust and know. There's no way we're getting away from that in the near future, no matter how much regulation might get reduced. So it's not about trust in financial services. But I need to know what happened. I need to be absolutely sure that something happened. And what I want to do is remove the need to have to spend billions of dollars reconciling to make sure that what I saw is what you saw. And what I think we did is what you think we did. Billions and billions of dollars. Some stats have been put up here on some slides earlier. Was it 1,600 people in every bank just looking at reconciliations? That's a lot of money. Billions of dollars a year around the world. So we can collapse the truth to one singularity, but it's not so much about the trust. All right, so you guys know by now, having had all these presentations, that there are tons of use cases, and I'm just focusing on the ones in financial services, right? Across all different industries. I don't need to get into this. You've already seen the 60 to 80 billion number, because it was quoted by someone else. The McKinsey number. Last summer, we spent the entire summer with McKinsey trying to come up with what are the big use cases in financial services and how much money could we save in potentially implementing these use cases. And 60 to 80 billion dollars with the top 4 use cases. Great. It's not really the point though, right? You know, as someone else has, there's a few people have said this perspective. It's exciting to start with the beachhead, which is let's do things faster, cheaper, better than before. But it's way more exciting to think about what this might actually mean for how we do business. We're going to change the way we do business if we're able to use this technology. But you've got to start somewhere. And the right place to start with the global financial services community is cut their costs because they can't cut them anymore and they're having trouble making money. But one thing I often say, and I think is absolutely true since I started saying this, is that it's a fallacy to think that you can be a fast follower when you're in a paradigm shift. This is a paradigm shift. This isn't, I've got my Thomson feed, my Thomson Reuters feed, and I think my Bloomberg feed's a bit cheaper, and I can just change my vendor one day and save some money. This is, I'm going to have to retrain my people. I'm going to have to get new developers. I'm going to have to retrain my developers who've all been working on Java. I can't remember the term. Was it 6 million people who know how to code on Java? Well, they're all going to have to be retrained one way or another to use this new stuff that we're putting out across the board. And you're going to have business people think about doing business in a completely different way. And people are going to have to make different strategic decisions. You don't wake up in 3 years' time and suddenly have retrained your entire organization to think about what it means to do business in this new paradigm. So it's a fallacy that you can be a fast follower, which is why I think there's this kind of continued sort of cycle of people getting more and more involved, which is very exciting. So don't hang around. The train's leaving the station. And this is great because the World Economic Forum did this work for us and kind of showed, now I'm going to start talking about R3 and how we're dealing with all of this. The World Economic Forum said that when you have the confluence of massive infrastructure replacement and competing interests, which trust me, there are a lot of competing interests in financial services, and a need to change legal, regulatory, and governance frameworks, that's the only place in the middle that you can make something happen. By the way, this is why you won't get Airbnb and you won't get Uber and financial services. There's still news stories going around about them getting fines, right? These guys are still getting fines in different cities around the world. If you try doing it in financial services, you'll go to jail. You won't get fined, you'll go to jail. That's why the Uber moment, the verb to Uber, doesn't work in financial services because you need the governments and the regulators to come along with you. And that's precisely what we've been trying to do. So R3 is right in the middle of that. That was how we came at the problem. It's one of the many different ways you've seen today of how to come at this problem. So we've gone about getting everybody around the table. That was the plan. Let's get not just the banks, the 42, but now we've got 78 global financial institutions around the world at the table. Insurance companies, reinsurance, asset managers, clearinghouses, sovereign wealth funds. Let's get the not-for-profit community involved. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. These guys are all thinking about ways that this might affect financial inclusion. Startup community, we have a lab and research center where we've had a ton of the incumbent startups come into our lab and research center and experiment with our community. And then the IBMs and the Microsofts of the world and the Intels of the world who you've seen today, all of them one way or another putting a lot of resources into this. Let's find a place with them and the academic institutions and crucially the central banks and the regulators, bring them all together and try and make something happen. So that's precisely what we've tried to do. Now the obligatory slide with a ton of logos. Great. So we've grown to be over 100 people in a whole ton of different offices. We've got to be very local in the way that we operate with our banks, who are all over the world, our banks and financial services customers. But what do we do? What does R3 do? Well, we're a platform and we're a services company. The platform part is we build Corda. I'll talk more about that in a second. And we're building an entire technology stack, starting with the open source Corda layer, and we'll continue to build up through there, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The services part is, that's that group of now probably in the hundreds of institutions who we've worked with to bring them together in a framework that allows us to actually think through how to adopt, implement, and get the kind of the information we need to build this technology. And that's a service, and we're going to build a lot more services in the coming weeks, months, and years. We're about to announce a fairly significant fundraise, which will put us in a whole new kind of orbit in terms of what we're doing. But let's talk about Corda. I'm not here to evangelize. I get everybody who's in this room. This isn't about one code base is better than another. There's different places and times for that. But this is ours. I just want to tell you what ours is. How did we come up with this? Well, we looked at the code bases that were around about 18 months ago, and we felt fairly legitimately that none of them at the time were fit for purpose for financial services. So we started building one of our own. Very, very slowly, and with time, it looked like it felt good, and we were working with the chief architects at all the banks, and we got some pretty good feedback from them, and we ended up open sourcing it in November of last year, and the community is pretty small compared to Ethereum and Fabric, but it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's really the core difference is the data model. At the end of the day, the bank said, and the regulator said, you can't broadcast all the information all of the time to all of the nodes. You can't do it. Legally, jurisdictionally, regulatorily, you just can't do it. You're not going to get away with it. It's impossible. So we had to come up with a data model, which is not a blockchain. There are no blocks and no chains. It's a distributed ledger. It's a shared ledger model where we're able to just share the data with the people who need to see the data. That was basically the core premise that we started at. And so that has driven everything that we've been doing. We're looking, as with everyone else, to make it enterprise grade. It's focused on the regulators, so they have the ability to see the data they need to see from the beginning. Regulate in parallel, not in series, has been our mantra from the beginning. Bring the central banks and regulators in. There's people made statements earlier as well. I totally agree. We're not going to get nowhere unless they're involved. So we just bring them into the projects and ask them what they think. Smart contracts, where it's real contracts, real legal pros, and is the document for a derivatives contract? How do we get that into a smart contract? And then integration, the great big part of all this is there's going to be a vast amount of integration that we need to go through to make this stuff work, right? So that's Corda. I'll maybe talk more about that in a second. So you know what, I've got a video, and I'm going to see if it's going to work. Is this going to work?
A lot's changed since the 1960s. Everyone's connected. Computers run everything, like our banks and financial markets, processing billions of transactions a day. But some things haven't changed. When Bob wants to make a transaction with Alice, they each need people to record the transaction, then validate it, then check what the other side recorded, over and over, each time something changes. That's a lot of people and a lot of work, all just to make sure that, in the end, what Bob sees is what Alice sees. What if there was a simpler way for everybody? Well, now there is. Distributed Ledger Technology, DLT. DLT is about sharing the data to keep people like Bob and Alice in sync, but it's also about making sure no one can change that data for their own agenda. There's a lot of DLT products out there looking to share data on blockchains, which are neat, but problematic. On a blockchain, everybody gets a copy of every transaction. That's a lot of duplicate data, and it's hard to scale to meet the world's needs. There's also privacy to think about. Sure, you can encrypt the data, but usually the only people who should have a copy of a deal between Bob and Alice are Bob and Alice. Now meet Corda, DLT, with a difference. When you make a deal on Corda, your data isn't put into a block with everybody else's. Each deal is individual. On Corda, you can tailor smart contracts for trading anything you can think of, and send data only to those that need to know. Sometimes that's just Bob and Alice. Sometimes you might want to plug in a service just to check the deal's okay. Sometimes a regulator will need to be kept in the loop. With Corda, you're in control. We've built Corda to deal with real business problems, in finance and beyond. We've made it easy to integrate using common tools and languages. And yeah, it's open source. We're all really excited about Corda, and we hope you will be too. So why not find out more? Check out our website, talk to our community, and see if Corda can help you.
DLT with a difference. You know you've made it when you've got a slightly cheesy video. So it's kind of cool though. So the next big frontier is let's stop talking about it and let's get this stuff into enterprise. Everyone's talked about it this morning. Govinder's thinking about it. And Joe and the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance are thinking about it. Mark Smith at Symbian's thinking about it. We're all thinking about it. The next big frontier is, can we stop mucking about, talking about it, and can we actually put it into production systems? And so this is our very stylized, very basic view of the future state. We've got an open source layer, and we're going to build an enterprise layer because we're being told we have to build an enterprise layer, precisely what Govinder was talking about. If you want to put this stuff into a real, honest-to-God global financial services institution, there's a bunch of people who are going to need to sign off on it, and it's going to have to be pretty robust, pretty secure. It's going to have to have a lot of support. It's going to have to be a lot of boxes ticked, and that's precisely what we are going to be working on. And there's going to be a networking layer. We haven't talked a lot about the networking layer, but somewhere in all of this stuff's going to have to communicate. And we talked a little bit about standards and protocols, and we have not figured that stuff out, and that's the future state as well. So we'll be involved in that. And then there's Cord Apps, and you may find this odd to hear from R3, but we're not going to be building Cord Apps. Everyone else is going to be building Cord Apps. We're going to be involved, we'll be helping, but that's not our mission. Our mission is to build the stuff underneath so everybody else can build on Cord Apps. Now, last comment, because I've been talking about this with everybody here. We're all in the same circuit. We all bump into each other all the time, right? We all know that this stuff's going to have to interoperate. There's no one code base is going to win the day, and that's going to be one big winner. That's not how it's going to be. All this stuff's going to have to work together somehow. Dogs and cats are going to have to live together. So we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to just finish on an example. For those of you who are in the industry, this is going to be a dreadful bore. You've heard it all before. For those of you who aren't, I'm hoping this is a glimpse to what the future state might be. And I always like to finish on this one because it kind of abstracts away from the big enterprise perspective and the big companies around the world and just turns it into something for us. What are we going to be looking at 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line as individuals, as people? We can all express what the internet did for us. We can all express what the cell phone did for us. But what is it going to do to the way we live our daily lives? And our story is very, very straightforward. I go to the doctor. I'm just going to go to the doctor. And I'm going to walk into that doctor's appointment and I'm going to biometrically, somehow through my thumb or my iris or whatever we concoct and think up for biometrics in the coming years, I'm going to identify myself. And some people have talked about it. Identity is one of the vastest, most unsolved and sort of intractable problems we haven't figured out yet as an industry and as a community, as an economy. We'll figure that out in due course. But at some point, you'll be able to identify yourself biometrically. And from that point forth, magic things are going to happen. Your records, the golden copy of your medical records, which you will own and I will own, my own information. I grew up in West Central Scotland in the 70s and 80s. I don't know where my medical records are. Some dude told me the other day they've probably been destroyed. Well, that's kind of weird, right? What about all that stuff? Well, in the future state, you'll own your medical records, and the minute that you identify yourself by walking the door through the magic of blockchain, you'll be able to get your medical records come from the ether and come back to you. And they'll be updated with everything that ever happened. And then the next thing that happened is your insurance company will be contacted and you'll know immediately what your deductible is and what kind of coverage you have, all from that one moment of identification, all instantaneously. No waiting for emails, no phone calls, no faffing about, immediately. So you have your medical procedure. Of course, you get your release of script. That's kind of now. That's very now technology. But what happens next is what's really amazing. My medical records will go back up, updated instantly. No more waiting. Before I've even shut the door as I walk out of the doctor's appointment, that medical records will be updated. My insurance provider will update my information. But every single payment that needs to be made between the insurance company and me and the doctor and everybody else will have been made and cleared and settled instantly. Accounts will be updated. Before the door closes as I walk out of the doctor's, everything's done. I won't have to wait for an annoying letter to come through the door that I don't understand, that's telling me, is it a bill or not a bill? I don't know. I won't have that nonsense anymore. It's all going to be done. It's going to be done securely and it's going to be instantaneously. And that is the future that we can look forward to if we get this stuff right. And just look at that workflow. That involved an awful lot of things had to happen. Insurance companies, banks, health records, health industry, identification, all of that had to happen for that future state to work. So it's not going to be 3 years, but hopefully it will be sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.